Hello there, Pursuing Freedom friends. This is your host, Erin Bradley. Thanks for being with us today. If you're new here, welcome aboard. And if you are one of my repeat offenders, thanks as always for tuning in. I love having you and your support. And I'm thrilled today to introduce you to my friend, Aaron Amuchastegui. And Aaron, oh my gosh, what a story this guy has in the real estate world. I don't know how we're going to reel it in because there's so much value that he brings to the real estate space. And I'm so excited to have him on the show. He is a real estate trend spotter, and he's done everything from owning and building brokerages to flipping over 1,000 properties. He's the author of a best-selling book from with bigger pockets called Bidding to Buy. He's also the host of the Real Estate Rockstars podcast. And I was honored to be a guest on the Real Estate Rockstars show not too long ago. And I have to tell you, this is like a pipe dream coming true because Real Estate Rockstars was one of the OG podcasts in real estate that I used to listen to when I was coming up in the business, and I used to share with all my realtor friends. And so, as you can imagine, Aaron is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm going to stop babbling on here and let him share his story from his perspective. So, Aaron, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me on here. That is quite the intro. Love that intro. That my ego is like my worst weakness, and so it loves it when I get an intro like that. But it makes me want to come on. It was so cool getting to interview you a few months ago. I've been the host of the Real Estate Rockstars podcast since 2019, and I've had different guest hosts come off and on. It originally started in 2017, and we brand it, and as the biggest podcast in the world just for real estate agents. Part of that's because it's been the longest standing, but it was so fun when I got to interview you because we're doing this interview. And then somewhere in the middle, you're like, wait, this story kind of sounds familiar. Or, you were the one getting interviewed, and we realized wait, have we connected before? Have we chatted before? The name looks familiar before. And we started going through even our homeschooling book and some other journeys and probably getting connected, way back when. And so we had a lot of fun getting a chance to interview you for that. You're also going to be speaking at our Real Estate Rockstars conference soon, so next month, and I'm glad to have you coming to join us as a member of that and sharing the stage. So how did we get here? We're going to talk real estate. We could talk about so many different things, but let's talk real estate. I'm going to start with a little quote that I was thinking about this today. I was recording a video in my car, and it was my grandpa was this old real estate developer, real estate agent, and I remember being 8 or 9, and he said, well, you've never really been tested as an entrepreneur or an agent or a man, he's an old guy, until you've gone broke a couple times. And maybe the best part about my story is I've gone rich and broke a couple times. But we'll jump back to so how did I get into I grew up in real estate. I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to skip the first 20 something years. In 2005, I graduated from college. I graduated from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. This was central coast of California, with a degree in construction management. If you remember back to 2005, and to any agents that have been around that long, 2005 was the absolute height of the housing boom, and home builders were king. And because of all my up and down stories prior to that, I took being a student really serious. I did some great internships. I was older when I graduated, went to school. And so I graduated at the top of my class. I had won 2 NAHB national championships up to 205. So I got so recruited, it was crazy. So I'm fresh out of college. I go to run a home builder in Southern California as a director of operations, which usually does not happen right out of school. And man, it gave me a really bad expectation of what life in real estate and development was going to be like. Because I was young, months out of college, making $130,000 to $150,000 a year, running my own subdivision. I had 20 or 30 employees right out the gate. And I was golfing 2 or 3 days a week. We would build these houses, and essentially in 60 to 70 days, they would sell as soon as we put them on the market. It was nothing could go wrong. So anybody that was around in 2005 is oh, I remember that. But what's crazy is if you were around in 2021, 2022, it felt like that 2021, 2022 also. So I remember back when we had a wild time 4 years ago. So that was what my life was when I started. I started in that real estate chain. Now, it was very short-lived. Maybe 12 to 18 months in, all of a sudden the housing market crashes. And it wasn't kind of slowly crashing. We started to see we had pendings go down. But when we talked crash, I remember like how to put it in perspective. I'm living in San Luis Obispo, which is great. And we're seeing less and less closings. We're starting to hear about foreclosures and we're seeing them listed. And the guys at the top of the company are like, that's not going to affect us. It's fine. And all these things. And I got a call from my boss in Sacramento and he said, hey, we just laid off 70 people. So we just closed our Arizona division. We're closing our Southern California division. So I should note we had 75 employees before we cut off 70 people. So he said, we've laid off 70 people.
Wow.
If you can move to Sacramento by Monday, you can stay employed. And they cut my pay in half. And I moved up there. So I moved up to Sacramento. So that was like first little journey. So now I'm like 2 years into my real estate career. And my whole life, I wanted to be a home builder developer. I like grew up. My dad was a builder. My grandpa was a developer. Like that's what I was meant to be. I went to school for it. I was at the top of my world. And all of a sudden in one day, maybe not one day, but it felt like in one day, my job that I had done became obsolete. It was like AI replaced my job. Nobody built a house for the next 2 years. And everything I knew how to do was that. So moved up to Sacramento, California, was making half as much money as I was before. I had a young baby at the time, and then I had a second baby born pretty soon after that. And part of, when my second baby was born like 6 weeks early. And I say it happened because my wife at the time she was working nights as a waitress at the casino while she was 7 months pregnant because I had 2 jobs to do. So she would work nights, I would work days, I would come home, she would hand me the baby, she would go to work at night. So this was like 2009. But that moment that my second baby was born, I remember staring at her in the hospital while she was hooked up to oxygen and going, I need to do something different. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to start my own business. I had tried 7 or 8 different businesses along the way, but the big business that I discovered was courthouse step foreclosures. So buying houses on the courthouse steps. And when I say discovered, it was like, we were just trying to do whatever, right? We were trying to do anything we could think of because we had this career that we thought was going to work. And I'll fast forward. So we tried to buy REOs from directly from agents. We had all these like things we were trying, and we found out later why we never succeeded there, right? But I'll just fast forward to the point that I started looking at this, and I heard that REOs went to an auction before they would become REO. I spent a couple weeks at the courthouse reading loan documents because there was no book, there was no class, there's no one showing you. But the loan document and the trustee sale got recorded would actually say on this date at this time, this house will go to auction. So I started showing up at the courthouse on those dates and on those times and watching a sale happen. And there was 2 or 3 guys there. And I said, hey, how does this work? And they wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't open their mouth. They wouldn't do anything to tell me what to do. I kept trying to figure out how we were going to do this. And the guys that I worked with at the time, the 4 left of the 75 we didn't lay off, they had come up with some money for us to go to auction the first time. And so I like essentially cleared title on this one. And we looked at it. We said, and it happened to be like right next door to like a house that one of the owners had owned before. And so we go to auction, and Eddie was the guy that was the auctioneer, and he would roll up on his skateboard and he put his laptop on top of the trash can. He's wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he starts calling out addresses, bidding on stuff. And he gets to that one, and we're there with checks to buy one house. Hundreds of houses are selling. These other 3 guys are buying some, not buying some. He says, all right, this address came up, and he says, opening bid of like 120,000, going once, going twice. And one of the guys I was there with goes, excuse me, because we were ready to bid on that one. And Eddie goes, yeah. And he goes, we want to bid on that one. And Eddie goes, okay, so do you want to bid a penny over? And we say, yeah. And he grabs the checks from Glenn, and he says, going once, going twice, sold. So now he's got our checks. And the other 3 guys standing there went, oh my God. And you hear all these stories about foreclosures. We're like, did we buy the wrong house? Did we buy a bad title? Like, why are the guys that are buying houses every day, why are we excited and why are they like terrified for us? I'm going to fast forward what happened to that career, right? Because my origin story is way too long, and I'm going to be boring your people already. Bought my first property with that company in May or June of 2009. My second daughter was born September of 2009, because by then we'd kind of discovered this new business. We were a few months in. And then I called my dad, and my dad's home building business had been shut down because he didn't have anything to do, but he had some money to invest. I said, hey, loan me money on this first project. I got an idea of how this might work. And I said, I'll do it for free. Just like, trust me with your money and I'll show you this can work. Fast forward, he was my first investor. Then he got a buddy in there. We ended up getting to raise this giant private equity fund. We bought and sold 1,000 houses over the next 3 years in Northern California. We were the biggest developer around. We were the biggest brokerage around. And we had gone from being nobodies in that town. I mean, I didn't even live in that town until 2009. And we went from being nobodies to the biggest real estate players in that town for 3 years. It was a heck of a ride. In 2012, Blackstone came in and they said, hey, you should come work for us. We're going to do this business now. And I said, I was this young, dumb, cocky kid that had just made millions off of this. Like, I had forgotten that I had gone broke already. I'd forgotten all the things. And I should have Googled who is Blackstone, and I didn't. And they said, if you don't come work for us, we're going to put you out of business. And to me, it's a big story. To them, like, they barely remember me, right? They go, oh yeah, that was that one of those 8 guys we talked to in Sacramento or something. But they put me out of business really, really quick. So I went from making millions and developing a bunch of houses and coming up with all these systems to build like this giant builder out of nowhere to within a couple years later, I remember like trying to do these odd jobs, applying to be an Uber driver. As I was like, what am I going to do next? So that's probably origin story number 1.
There's so much to unpack there. First, I really appreciate that you kind of jump right in with the transparency of going rich and broke a few times, because this is a theme that I've seen come up time and again. And the idea that, yeah, I mean, we have options, right? We can give up when the going gets tough, and we can decide that that was too risky and maybe I went too far too fast. And how did I find myself here again? Or we can take those lessons and learn and keep going, which is, I know what you did, because we're here today and you didn't just give up and throw in the towel. So, one of the words I wrote down as you were speaking and sharing this story is relentless, just like relentless commitment, perseverance. So I'm curious, because I guarantee there's people listening now in 2025 that might be feeling a little bit like how you felt in 2008, 2009, when, your world was rocked the first time and then it wasn't the last time. So like, how do you work through your own process of getting the wind knocked out of your sails, like literally getting knocked on your ass, and then still choosing to thrive, choosing to show up, choosing to take the lessons and apply them to whatever you go on to build next? And I do want to know what you went on to build next, because it's wild, but it's also like there's so many people in the last few years that you talk to, and it's like their energy is just defeated. And it's like, you're not defeated. This experience doesn't have to define you. There's lessons to be learned and there's opportunities. And so you get up and start finding them, even if it's driving Uber, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about that relentlessness and then the perseverance that it took to find yourself there again and still find a way through and to persevere beyond.
I mean, accountability is a beautiful thing, right? With goals, with masterminds, with friends. Like, if you tell everybody, hey, I'm going to quit smoking, and you're more likely to quit because your friends see you doing it. They're going to be like, why are you such a liar? Right. The accountability I had at the time was young kids. And I had young kids of like, why didn't you give up? Right. Because it was super embarrassing. Went from making a couple $100,000 a month to not being able to pay my bills. Went from making millions to not properly investing anyway at all, and just like running it all on overhead while I kept trying to beat my head against the horse going, maybe I'll beat Blackstone. It was painful and it was rough. How do you keep going one foot in front of the other? I mean, one is if you have other people that are counting on you, that helps, because you tell yourself you have a responsibility to do it. Something I started doing when I was really, really young, which I still do all the time. Whenever something bad would happen when I was young that seemed like the end of the world, because we have things come up that we feel like it's the end of the world all the time. When you're 5 or 6, it's not that big of a deal, but it seems like it's the biggest deal ever. You might have gotten in trouble for doing something. You're getting grounded for a couple weeks or whatever, right? There's these things, but you think it's forever. Well, I would always tell myself, hey, a year from now, I won't even be thinking about this anymore. Or 6 months from now, I won't even be thinking about this anymore. Or 3 months from now, if I did something embarrassing or somebody was mad at me. And that started to play out as I got older and older. And I'd say, like, a year from now, something else is going to happen. The first time it happened in 2009, went from being a home builder and got taken away in the middle of the night. First, I just had to show up. I was like, well, hey, my only option is to go up there. And then it was a really interesting time, because as stuff was crashing around, there was a lot of stuff happening that had never happened before, like in history. Right. And so it was kind of interesting to be watching. And then this belief that like some of the biggest companies ever, have been built in times like that. in bad times and like when nothing else was happening. And then we fast forward to like, then I made a bunch of money as this, and then Blackstone put me out of business. So like that time was embarrassing. It was heartbreaking. Like it was depressing. And at first it was like, just keep moving forward, just keep hustling to like pay the bills and not get foreclosed on. Cause man, that would have been ironic if I'd have gotten my house foreclosed on when I made my fortune of buying foreclosures. And then I remember there was like this switch. I read Hal Elrod's Miracle Morning. I read Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week, and I started combining those two things. And that really started to get me from my journey of sadness to like hope and action and like taking it a step forward. So two amazing books. And when you combined them, what started happening, I started getting up earlier and earlier. I would do a bunch of healthy things for myself. And the 4 Hour Work Week would help me get 8 hours worth of office work done in like 1 or 2 hours. So I would run my job, from like 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And then I would go do odd jobs as a manual labor. Cause I was like, so I would do like all of the office work the first couple hours and then go work. But I remember probably like 2014, I had all these things when bad things happen. I had all these mantras. Oh, if I ever get another chance again, I'm going to give more money away to like good things. If I ever get more chances again, if I'd have just kept 100 of those 1,000 houses that I flipped, I would have been set for life. Oh, like I'll do way more experiences over things. So I had all these like things, man, if I ever get another chance, I'm going to do this different, this different, this different, this different. Somewhere around 2014, I got this realization where I just became okay with it. My buddy called me in 2014 and he asked me for a loan. And I was like, oh dude, sorry. You didn't know what happened. Like I lost it all. Like I went broke. I mean, last time I'd really talked to him was like a couple years prior when he had come down and he was like filming documentaries of how big my company was. And he's like, what? And he goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And he was about to cry on the phone. And I said, oh no, dude, it's fine. Like, I know at this point, I'm just waiting for my next big moment. Like I've learned my lesson. I know why it happened because I did have all these big realizations. And so like right now, a lot of people got their teeth kicked in the last couple of years in real estate. It's been really, really hard. So first method of survival is like one foot in front of another. Second is like following principles of like the Miracle Morning, where it's like just trying to focus on yourself first, focus on health and like some mental toughness and things like that. So you realize that there can be some hope. But then now when bad things happen, I learned the lesson. I try to like really dig in. I think it's totally okay to sulk, Aaron. I think it's okay to be so mad at yourself. How could I have done that? How did I let such a big thing go? Why didn't I take that deal with Blackstone? How did I let my family down? Why didn't I save more money? Why? I think it's okay to have so much regret and so much anger and you really reflect because you really, really learn. But once you learn and you get to that moment where you're like, okay, this is why I went through that because I was stupid about this. I was stupid about this. I was stupid about this. Once you learn like, hey, this is why I just went through that tough time. So I would know this, and this. Then you have a responsibility at that point to stand up, get yourself up and go, okay, I screwed everything up. But this is what I learned from it. Now I don't get to sulk anymore. Like I owe it to me and everybody around me. Now I got to move forward with like the universe's lessons that I've just had and go try to apply myself again.
One thing I've seen a lot is that folks that have gone through that kind of, feast or famine is that the pain of the memory is still so palpable that when they start to embark upon that next big opportunity, they start to hesitate and pull back because they're afraid to go too far too fast or not pre-prepared or not, whatever, all the things, right, that we do to beat ourselves up. So as you started to embark on the next phase of your journey, what did it look like for you to recognize that sort of impulse to hesitate? Because the memory of what if it goes wrong pops up, even though you're called to what if it goes right. You know what I'm saying?
The that gave me chills as you set that up because it's so true. So I'm gonna fast forward to like 2015. So now it's like I've been hustling. I had applied to be the building inspector at the city of Napa, and I had a real estate agent in Killeen, Texas, send me a real estate listing for an apartment complex. Why? Because a few years prior, when I was in my prime, I had bought a different apartment complex in Killeen, Texas. I'd only ever been to Texas one time. And so now it's been a couple years. I'm randomly getting this call. And at the time, the only reason I bought the other one is one of my investors needed to sell it to me as a fire sale. So like I bought the first apartment like 2010 when I had plenty of extra money. This agent sends me a listing And she says, but we need to move fast because it's scheduled for foreclosure. So I look at the rent rolls and I look at like the sheets on it and I go, this thing's scheduled for foreclosure. It says they're trying to sell it for $1 million. It says the opening bid is like 320,000. Maybe I should go check this out. I've never had a rent roll before for an apartment complex. So I scrounge up some money for a Southwest flight. I still, people are like, well, how do you go back to auction? I still did have a line of credit. I had a line of credit that my dad had established before he passed away. When he passed away, which is a whole different story, the bank let me kind of keep the line of credit in place, with my mom. So I was able to pull these cashier's checks out from our line of credit, fly out to Texas. I was so afraid of flying at the time. I flew just to Dallas and then drove from Dallas to Killeen 3 hours. Wouldn't have to fly again. I was so afraid of flying. I figured if I did a connecting flight, I doubled my chances of dying. I get to auction. I show up there. The trustee shows up. Says, hey, I'm here to sell this apartment complex. The opening bid's $320,000. I have $325,000 in checks. She goes, well, does anyone want to bid? I'm the only one standing there. And she says, do you want to bid? And I freeze. I had bid thousands and thousands of times prior to this. I had successfully bought 1,000 houses, and I freeze. And she says, no bids, going once, going twice, sold back to the bank. And I sat there and said, oh my God, because of that story you just said, like I hadn't been successful in a really long time. But the fear instantly went to, did I forget something? Did I not do the right double check? Could there be a title issue? I'm in a whole nother state. I've never invested out here. Like all the questions of why this won't work hit me. And it sat there and the lady walks away and I'm like in tears. I'm sitting there in shock. I call my family and I'm like, I didn't do it. So, oh, did the opening bid come out too high? No, like having to explain, like I just froze. And they're like, what? We couldn't even afford the flight for you to go out there. What do you mean you just froze? So I sat there sulking in Killeen, Texas. And while I'm sitting there, another auctioneer shows up and he starts selling houses. And he's selling houses for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and nobody's standing there. And I thought, oh my God. In California, 2009, there was 3 people bidding on 1,000 houses a day. It was crazy. I mean, maybe it was hundreds a day, but there was 3 of us bidding on hundreds of houses a day. When I got put out of business in 2012, there was hundreds of bidders trying to bid on 2 or 3. So if you've got 100 people bidding on 2 or 3, but my whole mantra, if I ever get a second chance, if I ever get a second chance, if I ever get a second chance, and suddenly at the meeting at that 2015 auction, I looked around and said, oh, this is my second chance. This is exactly what it was, California 2009. And so then, even though I was discouraged, I flew back and I said, okay, I screwed up big time, but I got a really big opportunity here. I think I get a chance to restart my business. I flew out the next month. I flew out on Friday. I did what I know how to do. I drove 100 houses. I prepped for auction. I did title work. I did comps. My first auction, I bought 3 houses there in Killeen. This was after 3 years of not being successful at buying a house. I drove to Home Depot. I bought a drill. I called on the way to the first house to turn the electricity on. I plugged in the drill outside long enough for it to charge. I drilled out the front door lock so I could open up this vacant house, and the house had never been lived in. It was a VA purchase from the year prior that the person like bought before they got transferred and never moved in. So it was a brand new house from a year prior, 3,400 square feet, granite, stainless steel appliances, cabinets. I bought it for $135,000. I sold it for $240,000 a month later and said, I'm back in business.
Wow. And now how has the journey unfolded through obviously the boom and the prices going up and 2020 and the heyday and all the things to where we are now with this significant change? Like, are you as an investor still actively on the pursuit? Are you still buying from the auctions? Like when I know you've got an entire organization now built out under you. So what's that evolution look like?
So one of my big mantras was, man, if I would have just kept 100 of those 1,000 houses, I would have been set for life. And part of why I like Texas is I was like, there was no boom or bust in Texas. Like prices have just been the same forever. I'm like, I'm going to have something nice and stable. I'm just going to buy rentals every month. So I would buy like 10 houses every month. I'd fly out to Texas. Now auction in California is every day. Auction is in Texas is 1 day a month. That made it really, really like that was just a godsend. That made it possible for me to do what I did. So I'd fly out once a month. I'd show up on a Friday. I'd drive houses. I'd go to auction. I'd buy houses. And this time I started buying about 10 houses a month. I could quickly go back to some of my old investors from my old fund and say, hey, I'm back. Let's do this. And I would buy about 10. I would flip one or two, enough for down payments and enough to pay my bills. And I would keep the other 8 as rentals. I did that for the next 5 years. Let's go to like January, February 2020. I owned and managed about 500 houses in Texas. The funny part at the time is I remember thinking, I am not making that much money right now. 500 houses, rentals, getting the little piece on it, but you're making like what your real margin is like $200 a house or something. It's not huge. And for the amount of work and the amount of time, I was like, I have sure been working really, really hard out here. Like, and that's why I flipped originally, because flipping is a lot more short sighted. I could flip a house and make 50 grand. But one of the cool things about rentals long term, so we all know what happened when COVID hit 2020. Texas real estate went through the roof. I invested in Texas with the plan of prices will never go up out here. I'm going to have something nice and stable. But the prices increased to a point where a lot of the houses that I'd bought 2015, 2016, 2017 were now worth 2 or 3 times what I paid for them. One of the lessons I learned from Blackstone was the magic of the cash out refi, doing on a giant portfolio. When they put me out of business, I got to study all the things, all the regrets. Oh, if I'd have known they were doing this. So when I got my chance 2020, 2021, I did that. So let's see, 2020 hits. I have 500 houses. Prices go through the roof. All of a sudden, now I'm in the money. That 500 unit, that 5-year bet of every month flying out to Texas myself. I only had like 4 or 5 employees at the time. It was this long-term grind. I was still doing it every single month, but it was a bunch of singles. It was these risk-free singles, pretty much, of just building a business that I knew. Well, 2020, it was like the jackpot hit and it got paid off. And then 2021 was another breakout year. Then I did the Blackstone model. I remember January 2021. I don't know if you guys, whoever, like listeners that were in the market January 2021, try to remember back, because we had just had this giant boom of after COVID 2020. Prices went really high. We just got a new president elected January 2021. There was talk about inflation, but there was talk about the impending housing crash because of the change in what was happening there. And people also said prices just went up so much during COVID, that's not going to be sustainable. So in January 2021, no one was actually buying houses. It was really, really slow. A lot of stuff people were unsure about. Now, interest rates were still incredibly low. And my business partner at the time and I looked at it and we said, hey, we think there's a big opportunity right now. We think that everything is still really, really underpriced. And I remember one of the reasons Blackstone put me out of business is they didn't just buy everything at auction. I didn't know their plan was to buy everything at auction, buy everything on MLS. And by the end of the year, prices had gone up like 40% because people still wanted to buy houses. And then they did their big cash out refi. I remember texting my real estate agent. This was like January or February 2021. And I said, I need to buy $46 million worth of real estate in Bell County in the next 4 months. I need you to write full price offers on everything on MLS. And we're going to try to buy everything at auction, because we saw rates were super low. No one was buying. We thought we could get really good deals, and inflation was going to push these house values through the roof. We ended up buying a bunch of like new home neighborhoods. Like we'd go in and we'd meet with the builder. We'd buy all 8 of his, and we'd go next door and meet with the builder. So we have a couple neighborhoods where we bought every house from every builder. And the reason they sold to us is the banks were afraid to lend at the time because they were still nervous about the market. So they weren't going to release their construction draws until they got the houses in escrow. So they had to pre-sell. We bought up the whole neighborhood. We bought a bunch of duplexes. We had them in escrow for $240,000 a duplex, January 2021. October, by the time the houses were finished, they appraised at $400,000. So we did cash out refis the day that we bought them, and we bought whole neighborhoods like that. So those are great lessons of like Blackstone. Put me out of business. I learned so much. It was really, really horrible. But then I learned so much from it. It was like, okay, I'll hold as rent. I'll do rentals later instead of flips, this long-term thing. That paid off. And then paying attention to why their plan was way more sophisticated than I thought. And then seeing the opportunity January 21 to do the same thing that they did, January 2012. So now I do have a bunch of companies now. I've got software companies. If someone's going to buy a foreclosure in Texas, my company is the only one that sells them the real estate data for it. I've got the podcast. I've got a new home building company. But everything I do is involved in real estate in one section or another, whether it's the podcast or software or the other things. And there were a lot of different reasons and lessons. If we had more time, we'd talk about all sorts of them. But there were a lot of reasons why I bought certain companies when I did. Like, I'll share one quick thing. I remember in 2012, I'm staring at so when I started auctions in California, 3 people were bidding on 100 houses, right? When I got put out of business, hundreds of people were bidding. And I said, the only guy winning right now is the guy selling the list in Texas. That was Sean O'Toole. That was a company called Foreclosure Radar, which is now Property Radar. In Texas, I was buying the list from this company called Roddy's. And in 2017, I had an opportunity to buy that company. I was still the biggest buyer on the steps in Texas in 2017. But I said, this is how I'm going to hedge myself. I'm going to buy the company that provides the shovels. I'm going to buy the company that sells the leads. So eventually, when there's hundreds of people at auction in Texas, because I felt like I got to Texas before anybody else did, but someday when there's hundreds of people buying auctions in Texas, I'll be the one selling them the data. I'll be the one selling them the software. So that was another lesson of 2012 that I was able to use later in 2017.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. And number one, I love how you talk about how you've been honing the muscle of saying, a year from now, I won't even remember this. And it's interesting because every time I find myself in a time of uncertainty or overwhelm or fear or whatever, talking about honing the muscle, I will recognize that if I'm honest with myself, this is not the first time I felt this way before.
Yeah.
And yet here I am doing fine. And we can all relate to that. Like every single one of us can go back to those turning points that feel like those pivotal moments where in the moment you just feel like an absolute failure. You're feeling ashamed of yourself. You're full of uncertainty and worry and doubt and you no idea where to go from here. And yet we move through and we continue to grow and evolve. Should we be open to learning the lessons and making sure that we bring what we learn into what we do next, right? And so I think it's a beautiful thing, but I also think there's power in looking back at all of the beautiful things that have happened that were very much unscripted, that could not have happened had we not gone through the darkness, right? Like how
Yeah.
many doorways opened, unsolicited opportunities, unexpected relationships that would never be a part of your now reality had you continued on doing what you had done with, perfect ease and flow indefinitely. It's almost like what was Sharon Lecter one time on a stage was just talking about when one door closes, another one opens, and ultimately it can't open unless this one closes. The other thing I want to highlight is that you said earlier, it was a 5-year long grind of doing this, this, and this, and this. And it's funny because you shared a lot in this conversation and some highs, some lows, some learning, some, innovation, all the things, right? And 5 years at the end of the day doesn't sound like that much. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like that much, but in 5 years, look at what you were able to do. And there's a really cool book called it's called Epic, and I've talked about it before on the show, but it talks about the decade game and how we can underestimate what we can do in a year. Sorry, we can overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in a decade.
Yeah.
And when you share these not little, but these snippets of your life, right? These stories that piece together to become the fabric of this really cool now reality that you get to enjoy, those 5-year periods at the time felt so big and overwhelming and consuming or whatever. And now you can look back and be like, dang, if I could do that in 5 years, what could I be celebrating 5 years from now? So I'm curious, with all you've got going on, what excites you today? Like, what do you get excited about? What do you look back 5 years from now and be like, dang, look at that. We did that
Yeah.
too.
I want to recap something that you just said about like, the one door closing and one door opening. One of the biggest like oppositions of greatness is like good enough. If I had a decent job in 2014 or 2015, if I was making like $8,000 a month at a decent job, maybe I never would have flown to Texas for the next opportunity. But I was desperate, right? If Blackstone hadn't put me out of business, I wouldn't have studied their model so much and known how to repeat it in 2021. I wouldn't have been able to build the business as big. Or even like, here's the craziest part about even like 2009 to 2012. We invented an industry and we were the biggest real estate developer in Northern California. I was the last person that should have invented that industry. They talk about like Bill Gates invented Microsoft because he was the one that was at the high school that had the computer. I don't know if you've heard that story, but there's like, he's a one in a billion chance because the only guy that was going to discover and create the first computer company was the guy at that high school. Well, there were still 300 other kids that could have done it too. Like I was in the right place, right time in Sacramento. But like all of the other agents that were like doing okay, or all the other agents that like were successful before we're doing it, nobody pivoted into the business that I created. It was because I was absolutely desperate. I was an absolute nobody. I was the new thing, but I had this idea and this drive. Like there were hundreds of people way more qualified than I was to take over the Sacramento real estate spot. And somehow we were the ones that did it, but it was part of that, like the one door closing, and as you keep going. Let's see, what am I up to now? Some of the most exciting things now. So I've had like 4 or 5 once in a lifetime opportunities. Some of them, like, big regret of like '09, it didn't go big enough, I guess. Big regret of 2012 is I didn't sell the business. Biggest regret of like 2015 is I didn't buy more at the time. Probably biggest regret of like 2022 is I didn't refinance everything at that point and never buy another property. Like that was a pretty good time for real estate. About a year ago, I walked through a modular house that my buddy had just got delivered from a factory. He needed my help on the construction side. And I guess it's probably 14 months ago. And I walked through there, and these houses were built in a factory, and this 3,500 square foot house was just assembled with a crane. And I walked through, and I'm like, oh my God, last week there was nothing here. And then they poured this concrete, and then they put this house on here, and now there's this luxurious 3,500 square foot house. And I said, this is the future. So I took a picture leaving, and I posted on Instagram. And I said, I am posting this here for the time another $100 million company was born. So I can look back later for the time I built another $100 million company. That was the first time I had seen that in action. The guy wasn't my partner yet. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I knew this was the industry that I was going to go all in on. This was another once in a lifetime opportunity. And now we're the biggest developer in the city of Austin. We've got more permits than anybody else. We're building these houses like crazy. It is a perfect place, right time. My buddy that was doing it, he was hoping to do 10. He said, I want to do 10 of these in the next year or two. And I said, oh, no, this is way bigger than that. And I also said, in 2 or 3 years, everyone's going to know about this business plan. So, like, we've got a lead right now. Like, my big regret of 2015 was not going big enough. So I said, no, we got to do 200 to 400 of these things over the next couple of years before this business becomes obsolete, before we lose our lead. And so that's what we've done. So we've gone all in. It's what we're all in 100% on. It is really, really cool to get these houses that can be like 1 week you show up at lot, 3 weeks later it's done. And it's not manufactured like housing. We have some of these listed for 1.7, $1.8 million. They're super, super high end construction, just built inside and then assembled with a crane. So that's what I'm most excited about today. And another point of honesty, like in the last year, 18 months, real estate has been tough. It has been a grind. I have lost tons and tons of money on investments. I've got higher vacancies than I wanted. Even launching this company, we've done so much since we formed it, but it's still taken longer to really get off the ground than we wanted. It costed us more money to put it off the ground. And I've never been like so wealthy on paper, asset values, like super, super high net worth, but also so cash poor because everything that we're doing is like we're pouring into this. So I'm like selling assets that I shouldn't sell to like pull $1 million out to reinvest in this new company. But it's the entrepreneur grind. Like, I guess we've talked for a long time, but if I was going to give one piece of advice to close this thing out, especially for people that are struggling, and to remind myself of it too, is like the biggest opposition of greatness is just okay. Like, if you are just okay, if you have enough to get by, if you're able to survive, that's going to keep you from really taking the leap to like make something great. But if you can learn from these lessons that get us where we are, like learn from it, decide like, what am I supposed to take away? What action am I supposed to do different? As soon as you learn it, you got to flip that thing in your brain and go, okay, cool. Where's my next opportunity? Because back after 2012, when I got put out of business, as soon as I changed my brain to like, okay, I'm never going to get my old job back. I'm never going to be able to flip foreclosures in California ever again. Just like I was never going to be able to be a home builder in Northern California ever again when that crashed. So you're like, I can't do that again, but I learned my lesson. Now I'm looking for my next big thing. Everything changed.
It's interesting what you're saying about the biggest obstacle to greatness is good enough, because it's something that came up this morning on one of our community calls where we were talking, tough love, but why is it that some are thriving in a challenging market and so many are not? And it's ultimately a decision to do so. And so often, if we just started with where you are today, right, then the listeners could look at your success and start making up a story. Must be nice, easy for him. He must have, XYZ, right? We fill in, we
Yep.
create these stories to defend our limitation and keep us stuck playing small because it's too scary to imagine, right? And at the same time, if you really get in the room with somebody who's on that chapter 10 or on that chapter 20 and you have a conversation with them, you get to learn about all those pitfalls, and you might be able to get yourself to their chapter 10 by your chapter 3 or whatever. And so I think it's important that you shared everything you did so that the listeners can think to themselves like, well, I might be feeling stuck right now, or I might be killing it right now. But one thing is for sure, do not leave this conversation inspired and do nothing. Like that is the thing that gets me the most. I was on a training call this morning where I was taking a training and somebody said something about being a lurker.
Yeah.
This woman who ended up hiring the coach, she was like, well, I've attended all your trainings and I've been there listening to your podcast and I've been lurking in the corner, with my camera off. And it's like, I finally decided to take action and now she's sharing her success story. So I just think it's so important that people continue to tune into conversations like this, not just to know that you're not alone, you're not the only one struggling, and that if you're thriving, good for you for making the decision to do so, and continue to put yourself in the room and hang around the people that are going places you want to go, because it's going to unlock the belief in you that you can too. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your story and your time with us, Erin. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was so much fun today getting to chat with you again and getting to be on the other side of the hot seat after I got to interview you not long ago. Can't wait to see you when you're here in a few weeks. It'll be good to get to hang out and get to meet in person.
Yeah, for anybody listening, I think there may still be a few tickets left to the Real Estate Rockstars Mastermind in Austin, starting on March 4th and lasting through March 6th. And we will be there in person, hanging out with a small but mighty cool group of real estate professionals from all over the country. So I'm going to be releasing this in time for you to grab your ticket. It is completely reasonably priced. And hey, these are the things like Aaron shared earlier that he couldn't afford that flight from Sacramento to Texas, and then look at what happened and what doors opened. So you just never know what kind of magic will unfold when you put yourself in the room. So come and meet us in person. It'd be so awesome. And in the meantime, as always, I love you. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.